Centipede. Centipede.
Sup YouTube Visual Gaming Network, and welcome to episode 28 of our Mario game in Java tutorial. Last episode we implemented mini bosses into our game. This episode we're going to be implementing a launcher into our game. Now this tutorial's topic was suggested by FlyAKidaMC, and I want to thank him or her for suggesting this tutorial's topic. And I'm just going to quickly show you before I get into this tutorial. As you can see that the project folder layout has changed. Well, the navigation in Package Explorer has changed, and yeah, as you can see that browsing packages is more like browsing actual folders. Like you can see, I'll open the entity package, and there's our two subfolders, subpackages, whatever you call them, and yeah, I like this one more. And if you want to change it to the one I'm using at the moment, all you have to do is in Package Explorer, click the little arrow that points down. It should say View menu. If you hover over it, click it, then go to Package Presentation. The one I was doing before was flat. As you can see, this is a flat thing, and I personally don't like it as much as the what is it called? Hierarchical. I don't know how you call it. Hierarchical. I don't know. Oh my god, it's such a weird word. Anyway, just change it to that, and yeah, you'll get sort of more realistic, I should say, browsing through packages, and I like that. Now I'm going to get into this tutorial. We're going to go into our graphics package. We're going to create a sub package, and we're going to call it .gui. And in here we're going to make some GUI things, which will be including a launcher and a button. Now, if you don't know what a GUI is, it stands for Graphical User Interface, and it's pretty much a graphical, which means like it has graphics, yeah, a graphical interface in which users can interact with. So this can be like buttons, text areas, and even like frames. Like our JFrame is a GUI as well. And if you don't know, in the let me just type it out, you don't need to type this. In the javax.swing package, most, if not all, of the classes in the javax.swing package are GUIs. So yeah, it's pretty much JFrames. There's other things like JButton, JPanel, JTextArea, but I don't really use that stuff. And as I said before, in our GUI package, along with a launcher, we're going to be creating a button class to like make our own buttons. And because there's a JButton class in the javax.swing package, you might be wondering why I make my own button class instead of just use JButton, and I'll explain that in a moment. But first of all, in our GUI package, we're going to create a new class. It's going to be called Launcher. And in our GUI package, we're going to create another new class, and it's going to be called Button. And we're going to go into our launcher class first because this is really quick. All we have to do is create a public void render method with graphics.g like we always do. And for now, that's it. But for Button, we're going to need to create a few variables, of course. So it will be the x and y, width and height, and we're also going to create a boolean called selected and a string called label. So public int x and y, then public int width and height, then we're going to create a public string. It's going to be called label. Actually, at the moment we don't need a selected boolean at the moment, so yeah, I'm just going to go without it for the time being. So I don't think I've showed this to you guys before, but I'm about to show you something like source generate getters and setters. Well, yeah, you're gonna do the same thing. Go into source, then click generate constructor using fields. And we're gonna click on that, and yeah, just tick all the variables in here. Click OK. And what it will do is that it'll pretty much create a a little constructor for us, which is very helpful. I only discovered this recently, and I recommend you use this method because it's a lot quicker than typing it out. So we're also going to create getters and setters. So we've done this before. Source, generate getters and setters. Make sure every sort of variable is selected. Click OK, and it'll create getters and setters for us. We're going to scroll to the top, and under our constructor, we're going to create two methods. First will be our public void render method, of course, and then we're going to create another public void, and it's going to be called tick. No, not tick. Public void trigger event. And in this episode, we're going to program the game to call this method whenever our button is clicked. So whenever our button is clicked, let's say all the code in here will be executed. Now we're going to go into our launcher class and give our launcher just a quick little background. Let's make it a grey background. So set color dot. Actually, we'll make it like a magenta. Magenta's my favorite color, in case you didn't know. Yeah, I don't think I've said this to you guys before. But yeah, anyway, magenta's my favorite color. And then type game dot get frame width as the width for our rectangle, and game dot get frame height as the height of our rectangle. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, a few episodes back we created these public integer methods called get frame width and get frame height, and they pretty much return the width and height of our frame instead of having to type width times scale. And if we're out of our game, we have to type game.width times game.scale, which is even like slower, you know. So you just import game, and the reason why we get an error is because we're accessing these get frame width and get frame height methods in a static way, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But to fix this error, all we have to do is make our methods static. So public static int get frame width and public static int get frame height. Let me explain what accessing methods in a static way is. So accessing methods in a static way is like accessing methods but without using a game object. So I'm just going to show you an example of accessing methods in a non-static way. So I'm just going to create a game object here. You don't have to do this. And I'm actually going to use a game. What I mean by that is like the game object we just created. So by doing this, we are accessing game.getFrameWidth in a non-static way. But if we type game without creating a game object, then we're accessing this method in a static way. So hopefully you guys understand that. If you don't really, then maybe just do a little quick Google search. There'll be tons of things explaining what static is. Now we're going to go into our game class and make our launcher actually render before we play our game. So we're going to scroll up. I'm going to create a public static boolean. It's going to be called playing, and it's going to set that equal to false. And this will be true whenever we're not in our level and we're in our launcher or options menu, things like that. So when we're not actually doing any real gameplay at the moment in our level and stuff like that. You know what I mean. So now we're going to scroll down, go into our render method, and in our if show death screen is equal to false if statement, we're going to type and playing is equal to true. So we're pretty much saying if show death screen is equal to false and playing is equal to true, then call the handler's render method. And we're going to do the same thing for handler.tick in our tick method. If, oh my god, type properly. If playing is equal to true, then handler.tick. And we're going to do the same thing for our g.translate cam.getx cam.getY line. So yeah, just type if playing. So because when we're in our launcher and playing will be equal to false, none of these lines of code will actually get executed because they will only get executed when playing is equal to true. And when we're in our launcher, playing will equal to false. And under handler.renderg, we're going to type else if playing is equal to false, then launcher dot render G. Yeah, we get an error because, of course, we haven't actually created a launcher object yet. So we're going to scroll up and do that right now. Under public static camera cam, we're going to create public static launcher. Right, spell launcher properly, and go into our init method, and we're going to set launcher equal to a new launcher. Wow, I cannot type launcher for some reason. Okay, launcher. Wow, I did it! I'm so proud of myself. Alright, yeah, we just need to import launcher because it's in a different package. And now, if I've typed my code right, it should work. So we'll run our game. And there you go. As you can see, our launcher is rendering. It's showing our magenta color that we set in our launcher class, and yeah. So now, I'm going to go into our launcher class, and we're going to create a constructor for our launcher class. So public launcher, but we're not going to be like setting any variables in here. We're going to be doing something else. So before our constructor, we're going to create a public button array, and I'm pretty sure I've explained arrays before, so I'm not going to explain what I'm typing. So public buttons, and if I haven't explained arrays before, which I don't think I haven't, you can just look it up. It should be fine. So we're going to go into our launcher constructor and set buttons equal to a new button, and we're going to make 2 buttons out of this array. And under here, we're going to type buttons 0 is equal to a new button. Then this will be like our X, Y, width, height, and label coordinate. And why we type button 0 instead of buttons 1 is because this is an important thing to remember. Java always starts at 0. And if you don't remember this, then you're probably going to get a lot of an exception called an array index out of bounds exception, which I'll show you an example of an array index out of bounds exception right now. So let me just fill in these things like very temporary. And I'm going to set button 0 equal to buttons, let's say 5. Right, we'll run our game. But our game should actually not render, because if you go in our console, as you can see, that our game has crashed, and you can see that the exception we get is an array index out of bounds exception, as I explained before. And why this exception occurs is because sort of the numbers or code we're using is out of bounds. So buttons 5 doesn't exist in our buttons array, so it's considered out of bounds. And if it's out of bounds, our Java compiler gets confused and it crashes pretty much. So always make sure 0 is technically 1 in Java. So in Java we always start at 0. So I'm just going to change this to, I'm going to change the label to start game, and then set buttons 1 equal to a new button. Okay, 200, 200. The width and height will be 100 by 100. This is just a temporary coordinates and width and height as well. I'll probably figure out the coordinates off camera and just make everything perfect, make it more nicer as well. So the label will be exit game for buttons 1. And in our render method, we're going to type for int I is equal to 0. I is less than buttons dot length. So buttons dot length, if you didn't know, is the number of how many buttons are in our buttons array. So in this case it's 2, so buttons dot length will be 2. So I is less than buttons length, I plus plus. And in here we're going to type buttons I is actually buttons I dot render G. And what this is pretty much doing is that if I is equal to 0, let's say buttons 0 dot render G, so pretty much this button will get called. And if buttons is equal to 1, then it's pretty much saying buttons 1 dot render G, so it's going to render this button. Right, and we're going to go into our button class and create something simple. I'm just going to set the color to to white, and of course fill the rectangle. Actually, no, I'm not gonna like set the color. Actually, we will set the color to white, but we won't fill a rectangle. I'm just gonna set the font equal to a new font. The font will be let's make it Impact. No, let's make it Century Gothic. Now let's make the size about 30. Actually, font dot italic. Let's make the font italic, and the size will be 30. Alright, now of course we need to import font. Now I'm going to copy and paste some lines of code, and after I copy and paste it, I'm going to explain what it's doing. And don't worry, it's not going to be like 100 lines of code. It's literally only 4 lines of code, so I'm just going to paste it in here. And let me explain what this is pretty much doing. Oh, alright, just need to fix this error. Alright. What this is pretty much doing is that this code pretty much aligns our text to be in the center of our button. So it's creating this font metrics object, which I'm not exactly sure what it is. And it's creating string x and string y variables, which are the x and y variables that we're going to be using to align our text. And then it draws the string, and the x coordinate is the get x plus our string x, then get y plus our string y. And yeah, this pretty much aligns our text to be in the middle of our button, and it's pretty handy. Instead of like having to play around with coordinates and make sure you're precise and all that, this is a lot quicker, and it's very helpful. So now we're gonna run our game, and our button should render. And there you go. As you can see, we have our buttons are showing start game and exit game like we told it to. And just to show you, it's in the center of our button. I'm actually gonna draw a rectangle around the button. So get x, get y, get width, get height. This will just draw a quick little 1 pixel wide rectangle around our button. So let's run that. And there you go. As you can see that our text is aligned to be in the center of our buttons, but it goes out a bit, but don't worry, as I said before, the x and y width and height of our buttons are just placeholders for now, and I'll be changing the width to be much wider. I'm actually going to change the font to font.bold, and maybe just up the size a bit. Yeah, that's good. Alright. I'm just going to see how that looks. Yeah, I reckon that looks pretty good. I'll use that. And now we're going to create another class. We're going to go into our input class, create a new class, and it's going to be called mouse input. This is the first time we'll ever be using our mouse for our game. What the hell? Why is it there? Well, I don't know why it's there, but if this happens to you, then just drag it to where it should be. Just drag the mouse input.java thing to next to our button class or whatever classes you have open. I don't know why that happened. It's kind of weird. So our mouse input class will implement 2 things. It'll implement mouse listener and mouse motion listener. So we need to import the 2, and we need to add the unimplemented methods. So let me just make this clear. The mouse moved and mouse drag methods are part of the mouse motion listener class, and everything else, mouse entered, mouse exited, mouse pressed, mouse clicked, mouse released, is part of our mouse listener, our regular normal mouse listener. I'm just going to change arg0 to E. And I'm going to explain this right now because this may confuse some of you guys who aren't aware of this. So I'm going to explain the difference between mouse clicked and mouse pressed, because to you guys who aren't familiar with what I'm about to explain, it probably sounds like the same thing. But mouse clicked only gets called when our mouse isn't moving at all, we're not dragging or anything. So yeah, the code gets called whenever we click the mouse, but it isn't moving or anything. But mouse press gets called whenever we press our mouse, regardless of its movement or like if it's dragging or anything like that. It doesn't matter. And because let's say this is our start game button, it will be, and like people just want to do, you just like quickly click onto that while our mouse is moving. Well, I don't know what I did there. So yeah, people might just want to click onto our button while their mouse is moving, but it'll be annoying for like people, including you and me, to just get your mouse not moving at all, then click. So yeah, it's just easier to use the mouse pressed for what we're about to, for our launcher in this episode. And in our mouse input class, before our methods, we're going to create two integers. The integers will be x and y, and of course this will track our mouse x and mouse y. And now we're going to go into our mouse moved public void method, and we're going to set x equal to e dot get x and y equal to e dot get y. So what this is pretty much doing is whenever we move our mouse, this code will get called, and it'll set x to our mouse's x and y to our mouse's y. So yeah, this is a lot easier instead of having to, copy and paste for every method that we use. It's just easier to use the mouse move method because our mouse's x and y coordinate will change whenever we move our mouse. And now we're going to go into our mouse pressed method, and we're going to create a for loop. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than game dot launcher dot buttons dot buttons dot length I plus plus, and of course this is talking about our buttons array in our launcher class. And in our for loop we're going to type button is equal to actually it's equal to game dot launcher dot buttons I. I was going to type dot get I, but I just remembered that's for our entity in tile for loops, and need to import button. Alright, and make sure to implement the right button as well, because there's two types of button classes. Oh, and I just remembered, before I said I was going to explain why I like to use my own button class instead of the J button class in our javax.swing package, which isn't made by us, by the way. It's a pre-made class in Java for us to use whenever we get Eclipse. So why I like to make my own button class is because it's really just more flexible and easier to use. Let's say if I use my J button, then you have to sort of like learn what each method does and all that, and like you have to look up on the internet how to do this with your button, how to do that with your button, and yeah, it can take a while and it's quite inefficient. But if you make your own button class, you make your own methods and stuff, you know what you're doing with button class, and yeah, it's pretty much more flexible, efficient, and easy to use. So that's why I make my own button class instead of using a J button. So yeah, anyway, back to our for loop. We're going to create an if statement. If x is greater than or equal to button.getX and y is greater than or equal to button.getY, and x is less than or equal to button.getX plus button.getWidth, and y is less than or equal to button.getY plus button.getHeight. And what this pretty much does is it's going to call our button.triggerEvent method if our mouse is clicked and it's inside of our button. So yeah, if you're wondering why we type button.getX, button.getWidth, button.getHeight, things like that, it's kind of like creating a rectangle or of where our mouse has to be in order for this code to get called. So yeah, now we're going to go into our button class, and I'm just going to type this code and then I'll explain it to you guys. So we're going to create an if statement. If gets label dot to lowercase dot contains, then we're going to put in start as a string. and you spell to lowercase right, and make that, and give it brackets. And if that's true, we're going to set game.playing equal to true. Equal to true. Alright, we need to import game. And we're going to type else if get label dot to lowercase dot contains exit. I need to spell contains properly. And if that's true, we're going to type system.exit 0. So what this is pretty much doing is we're checking if our label contains a sequence of certain characters that we specified in this string, and the sequence of certain characters that we used in this if statement is of course start, and the other one is exit. And if you're wondering what to lowercase means, it pretty much sets all the characters to be lowercase only for this if statement. It won't actually set all our characters to be lowercase, but it's like only for this if statement we're going to set all the characters to be a lowercase. We can do to uppercase as well, and this will set all the characters to uppercase, but then we have to type start like in uppercases. Alright, just undo everything. So if get label contains a character sequence that spells out start, then we're going to set game.playing equal to true. Else, if our label contains a character sequence that spells out exit, then it's going to execute system.exit 0, which pretty much closes down our game. So now I'm going to run that. Yeah, we'll run our game. But if we click our buttons, then as you can see that our mouse actually doesn't work, and that's because we haven't added a mouse listener and a mouse motion listener. Like right here, we had to add a key listener so our game can actually listen to what keys we're pressing. We have to do the same for mouse listener and mouse motion listener. So we're going to type add mouse listener new mouse input. Then we're going to type add mouse motion listener and a new mouse input as well. And we have to import mouse input. Actually, because we use mouse input twice, we're creating two new mouse inputs, and I just want to be more efficient here and use the one mouse input object for the both of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly create a mouse input object. I'm going to call it mouse. Set mouse equal to a new mouse input, and replace new mouse input with mouse. So we'll do that. So now let's run our game. And yeah, everything should work. If we click exit game, then our game exits. And if we click start game, as you can see, it shows our lives. And there you go. We're in the tower boss like we were last episode. So after I finish recording this, I'm probably going to edit the X, Y, width and height integers of our button, you know, just to pretty things up a bit. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to wrap up this episode here. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like, a comment and subscribe. If someone you know is interested in learning how to program a game in Java, please send them this tutorial. I would highly appreciate it. If you have a Twitter account, feel free to follow me on Twitter, and don't forget to suggest what topic I will cover in the next tutorial. So I'll see you guys soon. Bye.